All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
Evelyn, medical assistant. The words used to taste different on my tongue. They used to mean order, purpose, a clean, white coat over a messy life. They used to mean I was a healer. Now they feel like a costume I forgot to take off. A character I play while the real me is shattering, piece by piece, on the sterile floor of a therapist's office. The room is too warm. The kind of warmth that's meant to be soothing, but just makes you feel trapped. A box of tissues sits equidistant between the two couches, a silent, pathetic monument to failed marriages. Dr. Evans speaks in that calibrated, calm tone she must have perfected in graduate school. Daniel, you were describing the communication breakdown you feel during conflict. Evelyn, can you share your perspective? I look at Daniel. My husband of 12 years. The man who fretted over the correct shade of blue for our son's nursery. The man who held my hand through 2 miscarriages and never once let me see his own fear. His face is a mask of earnest contrition, perfectly crafted for this session. He's been so willing to come here, so eager to fix us. I used to think it was a testament to his love. Now I know it's the guilt. The guilt is a physical thing in this room, a fourth presence, thick and suffocating. He starts to speak. I think sometimes, when we argue, Evie gets so caught up in the emotion that she doesn't hear what I'm actually saying. It's like his voice becomes a drone, a distant radio signal. I'm not hearing his words, I'm watching the shape of his mouth, the way his hands move. And then he says it. The thing that unravels everything. And it was just one of those things, you know? The whole project team was there, we had to work through the night to get the server back online. Mark, Sarah, Jessica, everyone was just drained. We ordered Thai food from that place downtown, the one with the terrible peanut sauce, and just powered through. The terrible peanut sauce. The world tilts on its axis. The warm room goes ice cold. My blood, which had been moving sluggishly through my veins, freezes solid. He told me this story 4 days ago, over dinner. A funny anecdote about a chaotic work night. He described it in vivid, perfect detail. The flickering fluorescent lights in the server room. The way Mark had spilled his coffee all over the diagnostics report. The specific, overly sweet taste of the peanut sauce from the new Thai place, downtown, that he'd never go back to. He'd told it so well, too well. A story told from memory is a living thing. It has gaps. It stumbles. It says, "What's that guy's name, you know, the tall one?" It says, "We got food from that place, the one with the green sign." It doesn't remember the exact, specific, damning detail of the peanut sauce being terrible. Not unless it's been rehearsed. Not unless it's a cover story. My mind, a tool I've always relied on for its clinical precision, begins to coldly, ruthlessly cross-reference. He said he was at the office. His location was on. He sent a picture of the server room, the timestamp correct. A cold dread pools in my stomach. He could have driven there, taken the picture, and left. He said the whole team was there. Mark, Sarah, Jessica, I know them. I've met their spouses. The story was airtight. It was perfect. It was a story designed to withstand scrutiny. And in that moment, in the suffocating warmth of Dr. Evans's office, the perfect story becomes the most imperfect, glaring evidence. Only a liar crafts a narrative with such flawless, unnecessary detail. A truthful person doesn't need to. The truth is messy. Lies are pristine. I feel the crack then. A seismic fault line splintering right down the center of my life, of my very soul. On one side is the woman I was 5 seconds ago. Evelyn, the wife, the mother, the medical assistant trying to save her marriage. On the other side is a stranger, standing in the rubble of a lie. Evelyn, Dr. Evans's voice is gentle, probing. You've gone very pale. Are you with us? Daniel is looking at me now, his expression a masterful blend of concern and confusion. Honey, you okay? The endearment feels like a slap. Honey, he'd called me that this morning. He'd kissed my forehead. He'd packed Liam's lunchbox. He'd lived a whole, normal, loving day inside the cathedral of this enormous, devastating lie. I can't breathe. The air is made of cotton wool and betrayal. I stand up. The movement is jerky, unnatural. My legs don't feel like my own. Evelyn, Daniel says again, his voice tighter now. The mask is slipping. I see a flicker of something else in his eyes. Not concern, fear. I don't look at him. I can't. If I look at him, I will scream. I will throw the box of tissues at his perfectly constructed face. I will shatter the window with my bare hands. I turn my back to them, to the couches, to the monument of tissues, to the entire pathetic pantomime of saving something that is already dead and rotting from the inside out. I walk to the window. Rain streaks the glass, blurring the world outside into gray, shapeless tears. I press my forehead against the cool pane. My reflection is a ghost superimposed over the weeping city. I am a medical assistant. I take vitals. I assess pain on a scale of 1 to 10. I am trained to look for symptoms, for signs of sickness. For 12 years, I have been living with a terminal disease and I never saw the symptoms. I was too busy loving the patient. The crack widens. I feel myself falling into it. I knew. Some deep, primal part of me knew the moment he started that story about the server and the Thai food. The details were a beautiful, intricate cage. And I was the fool admiring the craftsmanship. I close my eyes. I see him in some other room with some other woman, laughing, eating Thai food, complaining about the peanut sauce. Was it her? The old flame from college I was never supposed to worry about. The one he told me was just a friend. The one he still liked pictures of on social media. The pieces click into place with a sound that is both silent and deafening. I open my eyes. The ghost in the window stares back, her eyes hollow. I need to go, I say. My voice is not my own. It is flat, hollow, scraped raw from the inside. Evelyn, we're in the middle of a session, Dr. Evans says, her professional calm finally showing a hairline fracture. I know. I turn around. I look at Daniel now, really look at him. I look past the concerned husband act, past the familiar lines of his face that I have traced with my fingers 1,000 times. I look into the eyes of the stranger who shares my bed, my life, my child. And he sees that I know. The color drains from his face. His jaw goes slack. The mask isn't just slipping, it's crashing to the floor and shattering. The fear in his eyes is real now. It's the fear of being caught. He doesn't say a word. He doesn't have to. His silence is the confession. I don't say another word. I walk to the door, my steps echoing on the polished floor. I open it. The cool air from the hallway rushes in, a relief. I step through it. I don't look back. The door clicks shut behind me, the sound final, and period at the end of a 12-year sentence. I stand in the hallway alone. The world hasn't ended. The fluorescent lights still hum. A receptionist is typing. Life goes on. But nothing will ever be the same again. I am Evelyn. I am a medical assistant. And I have just diagnosed the death of my own marriage. The patient is gone. All that's left is the autopsy. The rain had followed me home. Or maybe I had brought it with me, a personal storm cloud hanging over my head as I fumbled with the keys to a house that no longer felt like mine. The click of the lock was different. The sigh of the door opening was a groan of sympathy. The air inside was still and tasted of the life we had built, lemon polish, the faint, sweet scent of a child's abandoned fruit snack, and him. His cologne, his coffee, the smell of his shampoo on the towels. It was a museum of us, and I was the sole, shell-shocked visitor. The drive from the therapist's office was a blank, a whiteout of pure, unprocessed shock. My body, on autopilot, had navigated the familiar streets while my mind was trapped in that warm room, watching his face crumble. The silence in the car was a physical weight. He had tried to speak, his voice a strained, broken thing. Evelyn, please, let me explain. It's not what you think. I hadn't looked at him. I kept my eyes on the road, on the wipers swishing back and forth, futilely trying to clear the deluge. Don't, I'd said, the single word a sliver of ice. Just don't. He'd fallen silent after that. The only sounds were the swish thump of the wipers, the hiss of tires on wet asphalt, and the deafening roar of the end of my world. He was gone now. The moment I'd pulled into the driveway, he'd said, Evie, we have to talk about this. I just unbuckled my seatbelt, gotten out, and walked to the front door without a backward glance. I heard his car door slam, but he didn't follow me in. He just sat there in the driver's seat in the rain. I didn't care. Let him drown. Now, standing in the hallway, the clinical part of my brain, the medical assistant, kicked in. Assess the situation, identify the injury, stabilize the patient. But the patient was me, and I was hemorrhaging. Liam. My first, my only coherent thought. My 7-year-old son was at his friend's house for a sleepover. A small, merciful miracle. He was safe. He was oblivious. He was building pillow forts and eating too much sugar, his world still perfectly intact. The tectonic plates of his universe had shifted violently beneath his feet, and he didn't feel a thing. Yet, I had time. I had this terrible, hollow space of time to do what? To feel? I was numb. The shock was a powerful anesthetic, but I could feel it wearing off at the edges, the first searing hints of pain beginning to bleed through. I moved through the house like a ghost haunting its own life. The living room. There was the couch where we'd cuddled last weekend watching a movie. His side, the cushions were more worn. There was the bookshelf, filled with his thrillers and my medical journals, a testament to our mismatched but complementary lives. A framed photo on the mantel, the three of us at the beach last summer. Liam was perched on Daniel's shoulders, both of them grinning, sun-bleached and happy. I was looking up at them, my face a portrait of pure, unadulterated love. The trust in my own smile made me physically ill. I couldn't be here. Not surrounded by these ghosts. I needed action. I needed to do something, anything, to make the internal pain external, to make it real. I walked upstairs, each step heavy, toward our bedroom. His bedroom. The door was ajar. I pushed it open. It looked the same. The bed was neatly made, a habit he'd kept from his military years. The stupid novelty mug he used for pens was on his nightstand. A book he was reading, face down, spine cracked. It was all a lie. Every single object was a prop in a play I hadn't known I was starring in. The numbness shattered. It didn't break slowly, it exploded. A silent, internal detonation that left rage in its wake. A clean, hot, blinding rage. It was a more welcome feeling than the grief that lurked beneath it. This I could use. I yanked open his side of the closet. The neat row of his shirts, his suits, his stupid, familiar sweaters. I hated them. I hated the careful way they were hung. I hated the faint smell of him that wafted out. I grabbed a handful of shirts on their hangers and pulled, hard. They came raining down in a tangle of cotton and linen. I threw them behind me into the room. I worked with a frantic, terrifying efficiency. I wasn't Evelyn anymore. I was a force of nature, a hurricane of hurt. I pulled down suits, pants, ties. I emptied his drawers, throwing socks, boxers, t-shirts into a growing mountain of fabric in the center of the room. I didn't fold. I didn't sort. I just destroyed the order he prized so much. I found the box. A small, wooden keepsake box on the top shelf of the closet. I knew what was in it. Ticket stubs from our first movie. The cork from the bottle of wine we'd shared on our anniversary. A dried flower from a bouquet he'd given me when Liam was born. The sacred relics of us. I opened it. I looked at the pathetic, treasured artifacts of a love that had been a lie for who knows how long. My hand trembled. For a second, the medical assistant in me, the preserver of life, hesitated. Then the rage won. I appended the box over the pile of his clothes. The tiny mementos scattered like ashes over the fabric. It wasn't enough. I saw his golf clubs in the corner. The expensive driver he'd bobbied. I walked over and kicked the bag over. The clubs clattered to the floor with a satisfying crash. I was breathing heavily, sweat beading on my forehead, despite the cool air of the house. The mountain of his life, of our life, sat in the middle of the room. It looked like what it was, garbage, but it was still inside. The contamination was still within my walls. Within my son's walls, I needed it out. I went to the garage and found the large, black trash bags we used for yard waste. They were strong, thick. I dragged the box back into the house. The physical labor was a blessing. It gave the pain a purpose. I bagged his clothes. I shoved suits into plastic sacks, not caring about wrinkles, not caring about the delicate fabrics. I bagged his shoes. I scooped up the contents of his nightstand, his watch, his spare change, a book of matches from a restaurant I'd never been to. Had he been there with her? The thought made me savage, and I threw it all in a bag. It took 4 bags, 4 large, heavy, lumpy black sacks. They sat in the middle of the room like monstrous, formless tumors I had cut out of my home. The rain was still falling outside. A steady, cold Pacific Northwest drizzle. Perfect. I dragged the first bag downstairs. It was heavy, unwieldy. I bumped against the walls, not caring about the scuff marks. I wrestled it through the kitchen and out the back door into our fenced backyard. The grass was slick and wet. The sky was a uniform sheet of gray. I went back for the second bag, and the third, and the fourth. I lined them up on the patio, 4 silent witnesses to my insanity. This was the expression of my grief, not crying, not screaming. This, the methodical, brutal physical eviction of a man from his own home. I stood there in the rain, soaked to the skin, my hair plastered to my face, looking at the bags. It wasn't enough. He needed to see this. He needed to know that his things, his carefully constructed life, were nothing more than garbage waiting for pickup. I left them there, in the rain, a monument to his infidelity. I went back inside, dripping on the hardwood floor. I locked the back door. I walked through the silent, hollow house, up the stairs, past the empty, ravaged closet. I went into Liam's room. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of his bed, surrounded by his stuffed animals and Lego models. The smell in here was just him, just my son, untainted. The rage was spent, the adrenaline faded. And what was left was a hollow, aching silence so profound it had its own sound. It was the sound of a future canceling itself. I curled up on Liam's small bed, hugging his pillow that smelled of little boy and innocence, and I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for. For the pain to come, for him to come home, for the world to make sense again. Outside, the rain fell on the black plastic bags, soaking the contents, eroding the past one drop at a time. The autopsy was complete. The cause of death was clear. Now, all that was left was to bury the body. Silence has a texture. In the days that followed, it became a thick, woolen blanket smothering the house. It was in the empty space on the other side of the bed, a vast, cold continent I dared not explore. It was in the lack of his key in the door at 6:15 p.m., the absence of his low murmur on phone calls in the other room. The house, once filled with the comfortable, mundane sounds of a shared life, had become an echo chamber for my own frantic thoughts. He'd tried to come back, of course. The day after the bags, he'd rung the doorbell, his face pale and desperate through the peephole. I'd stood on the other side of the door, my hand pressed against the wood, feeling the vibration of his knocking, saying nothing. He'd called, texted, a barrage of pleas and explanations that I deleted without reading. The messages were like symptoms of a disease I was now immune to. I'd already survived the worst of it. My grief was no longer a raging fire. It had banked to a low, constant smolder. It was the first thing I felt upon waking and the last thing I felt before a fitful, exhausted sleep. It was a weight in my chest, a permanent, heavy stone of sadness. The only thing that punctured the silence was Liam. He came home from his sleepover, a whirlwind of leftover excitement and sticky hands. "Where's Daddy?" he'd asked, dropping his backpack by the door. The question, so simple and innocent, was a knife to the heart. I had practiced this. I had stood in the mirror and tried out phrases like "Daddy and I need some time apart" or "Daddy is living somewhere else for a while." They all sounded like lies, like clichés from a bad movie. My marriage had ended in a cliché. Why shouldn't its explanation be one? I knelt down, bringing myself to his eye level. His face, so like his father's, was open and trusting. "Hey, bug," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "You know how sometimes things change? Like when we had to get a new car because the old one kept breaking down?" He nodded, his brow furrowed in serious concentration. "Well, Daddy and I were having a change. He's not going to be living here with us for a while. He has his own apartment now. But," I added quickly, seeing his lower lip begin to tremble, "he loves you more than anything in the whole world. That will never, ever change. You'll still see him all the time. This is not about you. This is a grown-up problem." It was the best I could do. It was a clinical, sanitized version of the truth, a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. He cried. I held him on the couch, rocking him, whispering nonsense into his hair, my own tears silently soaking into his shirt. We sat there until the light faded from the windows, two lost souls in a suddenly enormous house. The silence after he fell asleep was the worst. It was then that the questions would come, swarming like angry hornets. Who is she? How long? Was it in our bed? Did he tell her he loved her? Did he complain about me? What did I do wrong? Was I not enough? The questions were a torture device, each one a turn of the screw, deepening the pain. I'd wander the house, a ghost in my own life, picking up objects and seeing them through this new, horrifying lens. The business trip to Spokane last fall. Had she been there? The weekend he said he was fishing with Mark. Was he with her? My mind became a detective agency dedicated to my own misery, piecing together a timeline of betrayal from half-remembered details and invented scenarios. I couldn't eat. Food tasted like ash. I couldn't focus. I called in sick to the clinic, spinning a lie about a violent stomach flu. The thought of putting on my blue medical assistant scrubs, of smiling reassuringly at patients, of being competent and caring felt like a grotesque joke. How could I care for anyone when I was this broken? I was drowning in the silence, in the echoes of my own pain. I'd find myself standing in the middle of a room, having forgotten what I came in for, just staring into space as the minutes ticked by. The house was a mess. Liam's toys were scattered across the floor, dishes piled in the sink. The order I had always prided myself on had completely dissolved. I was dissolving with it. The lowest point came on a Tuesday. It had been a week. 1 week since the world ended. Liam was at school. The house was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the frantic beating of my own heart. I was sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by the debris of our life, holding the beach photo from the mantel. I traced the glass over my own smiling face. You idiot, I thought. You happy, trusting idiot. The grief was a physical pressure, building behind my eyes, in my throat, in my chest. It was going to break me. I was going to shatter into a million pieces right there on the stained carpet. I had to get out. I couldn't be in this echo chamber for one more second. I shoved the photo face down on the coffee table, pulled on a raincoat over my pajamas, and stumbled out the front door. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked. The drizzle misted my face, mingling with the tears I was no longer trying to hold back. I walked past neat suburban houses with their warm, lit windows. I could see glimpses of other people's lives. A woman cooking in her kitchen, a man watching TV, a family sitting around a table. Normal, intact lives. They felt like exhibits in a museum I could no longer visit. I found myself at the edge of a small neighborhood park. It was deserted, the playground equipment slick with rain, the swings moving gently in the wind like restless ghosts. I sat on a wet bench, the cold seeping through my pants, and finally let the sobs come. They were ugly, ragged things, torn from deep inside me. I cried for the past I had lost. I cried for the future I had planned. I cried for my son, whose world was now irrevocably broken. I cried for myself, for the woman I was, who had believed so fiercely in a lie. I cried until I was empty, until there were no more tears left. I just sat there, hollowed out, watching the empty swings arc back and forth. Squeak thud, squeak thud. The sound was rhythmic, hypnotic. It was the only sound, apart from the soft fall of rain. And in that hollowed-out silence, a new thought emerged. It wasn't a loud, dramatic thought. It was a whisper, a tiny, fragile thing. I cannot live like this. It wasn't a declaration of strength. It was a simple, stark assessment. The current situation was untenable. The echo chamber was killing me. The pain wasn't gone. The questions hadn't vanished, but the crying had released some of the pressure. I felt raw, scraped clean, but I could breathe again. I stood up from the bench, my body stiff and cold. I looked back at the path that led home, to the silence, to the mess, to the life that was in ruins. I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't silence the echoes. But I could maybe change the station. I could maybe make a new sound. I didn't know how, but the thought was there. A single, small ember in the vast, cold darkness. I turned and walked back home. The walk felt different. The weight was still there, but I was carrying it now, not the other way around. I had reached the bottom. There was only one way left to look. Up. The silence in the house the next morning was different. It was no longer a suffocating blanket. It was a blank page. The tears on the park bench had washed something away, leaving behind a cold, clear certainty. The diagnosis was final. My life was critically ill. And as a medical assistant, I knew the next step was to formulate a treatment plan. I stood in the shower, letting the hot water scald my skin, washing away the lingering self-pity from the day before. I looked at my face in the steamed-up mirror. The eyes that stared back were red-rimmed but clear. They were the eyes of a survivor, not a victim. I cannot live like this, the whisper from the park echoed. So how would I live? The answer came not as a grand epiphany, but as a simple, practical need. Liam. He was my primary concern, the one vital sign I had to stabilize. His world had been shaken, and my crumbling was only making it worse. I had to show him and myself that we could still stand. That our foundation, while cracked, was not completely destroyed. I had to model resilience, even if I had to fake it until the feeling became real. The first part of the treatment was environment. The house was a museum of pain. Every room held a ghost. I couldn't afford to move, not yet, but I could redecorate. I could exorcise the ghosts through sheer force of will. After dropping Liam off at school, I went to a home goods store. It was a surreal experience. The cheerful, generic pop music, the smell of scented candles, the couples debating throw pillow colors. I felt like an imposter, a visitor from a planet where happiness was a foreign currency. I moved through the aisles with a clinical detachment. This wasn't shopping, it was procurement. I didn't buy anything he would have liked. I avoided the muted blues and grays he preferred. I went for colors that felt bold to me. A deep emerald green duvet cover, a set of vibrant yellow towels, a garish, abstract art print with splashes of coral and gold. It was ugly and it was loud and it was mine. I bought new sheets, new kitchen towels, a new shower curtain. I was systematically replacing the visual reminders of our shared life. Back home, I worked with a frenetic energy I hadn't felt in weeks. I stripped the bed, bagging up the old sheets and donating them to a bin in the parking lot. I made the bed with the new, shockingly green cover. It was like a declaration of war on beige. I hung the new art. I put the yellow towels in the bathroom. The change was jarring, almost offensive to the eye. It was perfect. The physical act of changing my surroundings was a powerful analgesic. It was a tangible action with a visible result. I was no longer a passive recipient of pain. I was an active participant in my own recovery. But the environment was only half the battle. The real sickness was inside me. The constant loop of questions, the corrosive anger, the bottomless grief. My mind was a sick patient, and it needed a stronger prescription. Pills weren't the answer. I needed something that would demand all of me, something so physically consuming it would leave no room for mental anguish. The randomizer had chosen hiking. It was almost laughable. I was a medical assistant who spent her days on her feet, but my idea of nature was a well-manicured city park. The thought of deliberately walking up a hill for fun seemed masochistic. But that was the point. I needed the masochism. I needed to feel a burn in my muscles that wasn't emotional. I needed to be so tired I could fall asleep without the movie of my betrayal playing behind my eyelids. I dug out an old pair of trainers from the back of the closet. I filled a water bottle. I drove to Discovery Park, one of the largest in Seattle, with miles of trails through forests and along bluffs overlooking the Puget Sound. The moment I stepped out of the car, the scale of it intimidated me. The trees were enormous, the trails disappearing into a deep, dark green. The air smelled of damp earth and salt. It was the antithesis of my sterile, clinical world. I chose a trail at random and started walking. The first 5 minutes were awful. My body protested. My mind whined, "This is stupid. You're tired. Go home. He's probably with her right now, laughing. What did you do wrong?" The thoughts came as they always did. I walked faster, pushing against the incline. My breath started to come in short gasps. The path was rocky, uneven. I had to watch my feet, to focus on where I placed each step. The mental noise began to recede, just a little, pushed out by the simple, primal need for oxygen. I reached a lookout point, my heart hammering against my ribs, sweat cooling on my forehead. The view was breathtaking. The steel-gray water of the Sound, the distant Olympic mountains shrouded in mist, a container ship moving slowly like a toy. The vastness of it all should have made me feel small and insignificant. Instead, it made my problems feel small and insignificant. My personal tragedy was a tiny, silent drama playing out in one of millions of houses dotting the landscape. The world was enormous, and it was utterly indifferent to my pain. There was a strange, profound comfort in that. On the way back down, something shifted. The rhythm of my steps, the sound of my own breath, the rustle of leaves in the wind, it became a kind of meditation. The angry, looping thoughts were still there, but they were like background static now, not a deafening roar. For a few minutes at a time, I would forget to be sad. I would just be a body, moving through space, feeling the burn in my calves, the chill of the air on my skin. It was a revelation. The pain was still there, a dull, gray ache in my chest, but it was no longer the only thing I could feel. I could also feel the satisfying strain of my muscles. I could feel the cold water from my bottle. I could feel the simple accomplishment of having reached the top and come back down. I drove home, physically exhausted, but mentally clearer than I had been in weeks. The house, with its new, garish colors, didn't feel like a mausoleum anymore. It felt like a project, a work in progress, just like me. That night, after I put Liam to bed, I didn't crumble. I sat on my emerald green couch and I opened my laptop. I didn't look at his social media. I didn't torture myself with questions. I Googled hiking trails. I looked at maps. I found a list of 10 best day hikes near Seattle. I had found my prescription. It wasn't a cure. It was a treatment, a regimen. One foot in front of the other, one trail at a time. It was a way to move through the pain, literally, until one day, maybe, I would realize I had moved past it. The healing wouldn't be a sudden miracle. It would be a slow, arduous climb. But for the first time since that therapist's office, I had looked up and seen the path stretching out ahead of me. And I had taken the first step. The trail became my new liturgy. Every Saturday morning, while Liam was with Daniel for his court-appointed visitation, I would lace up my now muddy trainers, fill my water bottle, and drive. It was no longer an act of desperation, but one of devotion. A commitment to the woman I was becoming, one arduous step at a time. I started with the easy trails, the wide, well-groomed paths that families with strollers could manage. But my hunger for the burn, for the mental whiteout that only a brutal incline could provide, quickly grew. I graduated to steeper, more demanding routes. The Mailbox Peak Trail nearly broke me. Halfway up, my lungs screaming, my legs trembling with fatigue, I had to stop every 10 steps, bent double, hands on my knees, convinced I would have to turn back. The thought of Daniel, of the affair, didn't even cross my mind. There was no room for it. There was only the next step, the next rock, the next gasp of thin, cold air. I made it to the top, and the victory felt more personal and more hard-won than any achievement in my entire life. No one had given it to me. No one could take it away. My body began to change. The softness that had come from years of comfortable married life tightened into lean muscle. My skin, usually pale from fluorescent clinic lighting, took on a healthy glow from hours spent in the open air. I could see the physical transformation in the mirror, a visible, tangible record of my progress. But the internal change was more profound. On the trail, my mind, which had been a chaotic, pain-filled echo chamber, found a new rhythm. It synced with the crunch of my boots on the path, the steady in and out of my breath. The relentless loop of why and how and who began to quiet. Instead, my brain would latch onto the simple, immediate needs of the climb, find a secure footing on that route. Navigate that patch of mud. You're thirsty, take a sip. Almost at the next switchback. It was a form of mindfulness I'd never been able to achieve with meditation. This was meditation in motion. The pain was still there, a familiar companion, but it was no longer the loudest voice in the room. It had been joined by others. The voice of my body telling me it was strong, the voice of my will urging me forward, and a new, fragile voice that occasionally piped up to note the way the sunlight filtered through the cedar branches or the startling blue of a Stellar's jay. I began to recognize other regulars on the trails. There was a silent nod of acknowledgement, a shared understanding among those who sought solace or challenge in the mountains. I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to heal. But the simple, wordless camaraderie was a balm. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was part of a quiet, moving congregation. One drizzly Sunday, on the Rattlesnake Ledge Trail, I saw her. An older woman, probably in her 70s, moving at a slow but impossibly steady pace. Her face was a roadmap of wrinkles, but her eyes were clear and bright. We reached the overlook at the same time, the view of the lake below shrouded in mist. "You'd think the view would be the reward," she said, her voice raspy but strong. She didn't look at me, she was looking out at the gray emptiness. "But it's not. The reward is knowing you can make the climb." I looked at her, surprised. I'd grown used to the unspoken rule of trail silence. She finally turned to me, a small smile on her lips. "I started after I lost my George. 20 years ago. This was our spot. First time I came up here alone, I cried the whole way. Now I just come up to breathe." I just nodded, my throat tight. She had seen it on me, the fresh grief, the determination that is its only antidote. She didn't offer pity or advice. She just stated a fact. She had made the climb. And so could I. She turned and began her careful descent, leaving me alone with the mist and her words. They settled into me, finding a home next to the growing strength in my core. The reward is knowing you can make the climb. I started to bring that feeling back from the trails, the calm focus, the proven strength. It began to seep into my other life. At work, I was sharper, more present with the patients. Their worries and pains felt manageable because I was managing my own. I stopped seeing their ailments as metaphors for my own brokenness. A sprained ankle was just a sprained ankle. I could wrap it. I could advise on ice and elevation. I could fix it. At home, the silence lost its menacing quality. It became just quiet. I started playing music again. Not the soft rock station Daniel loved, but loud, empowering pop anthems that Liam and I could dance to in the kitchen while making messy pizzas. The house, with its clashing new colors, began to feel less like a rebellion and more like a true expression of us. Of me, I was building a new life, not just dismantling the old one. The hikes were the foundation. Each summit was a brick laid in the structure of my new self. I was no longer Evelyn, the betrayed wife. I was Evelyn who could climb a mountain. Evelyn who could carry her own weight. Evelyn who was learning, slowly, to breathe on her own again. The grief still visited. It would ambush me at odd moments. A song on the radio, the smell of his cologne on Liam's jacket when he returned from a visit. But it was no longer a permanent resident. It was a ghost that passed through, and I had learned to let it in, acknowledge its presence, and then watch it leave without trying to cling to it. I was healing. Not because the wound had closed, it was still there, a scar that would always be tender to the touch, but because I had built muscles around it. Strong enough to carry it. Strong enough to carry myself. Strong enough, finally, to look up from the path immediately in front of my feet and appreciate the view of how far I had come. The rhythm of my new life had become a familiar, comforting song. The verse was my days at the clinic, the beep of monitors, the soft rustle of patient gowns, the focused calm of taking vitals and soothing anxieties. The chorus was the trail, the crunch of earth underfoot, the burn in my lungs, the silent, soaring triumph of a summit reached. It was a good song, a stable one. It was about self-preservation, about building a fortress of routine where the ghosts of my past couldn't find a way in. But fortresses, by their nature, are isolating. The realization came on a rare, sunny Saturday. Liam was with Daniel for the weekend. The laundry was done. The house was clean. I'd already done my hike that morning, tackling the Poo Point Trail with a fierce, almost robotic efficiency. I stood in the middle of my living room, with its defiantly bright new colors, and felt a strange, hollow ache. The silence wasn't painful anymore, but it was empty. The song of my life was steady, but it was a solo. I had become so focused on being strong on my own that I had forgotten what it felt like to harmonize with another soul. I wasn't looking for a man. The very idea sent a cold spike of panic through me. Trusting a man felt like willingly walking back into a house that had already burned down once. But I was lonely. Not for a partner, but for connection. For a conversation that didn't revolve around a child's schedule or a patient's blood pressure. On an impulse, I drove to Elliott Bay Book Company, a sprawling, beloved independent bookstore in Pioneer Square. It was a place Daniel had never had the patience for. The smell of old paper and new ink was a tonic. I wandered the aisles, my fingers trailing over the spines of thousands of other lives, other voices. I was looking for nothing in particular, just something. I found myself in the fiction section, in the SS, and my hand stopped. East of Eden. My copy, the one I'd had since college, was still boxed up somewhere in the garage, a relic from a life I was trying to forget. But I remembered the feeling of reading it, the sheer, sprawling humanity of it. I reached for a fresh copy, its cover crisp and promising. At the exact same moment, another hand reached for the same book. Our fingers didn't touch, but the proximity was enough to make us both startle and pull back. I looked up. "Sorry," we said in unison, then both gave awkward, hesitant smiles. He was tall, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and a beard that had a few streaks of premature gray in it. He wore a flannel shirt under a worn leather jacket. He looked solid. Grounded. "After you," he said, his voice a warm, quiet baritone. He gestured to the book. "Oh no, it's okay," I said, my social skills rusty from disuse. "You had it first. We could arm wrestle for it." he suggested, the crinkles around his eyes deepening. But I feel like I should warn you, I'm surprisingly agile for a bookseller. You work here? I asked, grasping at the easiest thread of conversation. Guilty, he said, nodding. Alex, history and classics section mostly. But I make forays into fiction to keep things interesting. He looked at the book in my hand. Steinbeck, a classic for a reason. First time? A reread, I said, finding myself strangely reluctant to end the conversation. It felt like time for a fresh copy. He nodded as if that made perfect sense. Nothing like a new copy for a new beginning. The words are the same, but the book itself, it's unmarked by the past. Clean slate? His words landed with an accuracy that made my breath catch. He had no idea, of course, but it felt eerily prescient. A clean slate. Exactly, I said, my voice softer than I intended. There was a comfortable pause. It wasn't the loaded, painful silence of my house. It was just a pause, a shared moment of quiet in a busy bookstore. Well, I'll let you get to your clean slate, he said, smiling again. Enjoy the journey, again. Thank you, I said. Alex, he nodded, gave a little wave, and turned to walk down the aisle. I watched him go for a second, then looked down at the book in my hands. A new copy for a new beginning. I paid for the book and was about to leave when I saw him again. He was behind the counter in the history section, helping an older woman find a book on maritime trade routes. He was patient, listening intently, his large hands gently handling the books as if they were precious artifacts. He wasn't just being polite, he was genuinely engaged. I didn't approach him. I didn't want to. The moment had been what it was. A tiny, unexpected point of human connection. A reminder that there were kind, interesting people in the world. People who loved books and didn't see a conversation as a transaction. But as I walked out into the afternoon sun, the new book a comforting weight in my bag, I felt something shift. The fortress walls hadn't come down, but a window had opened. I had let a sliver of the outside world in, and it hadn't hurt. It had felt nice. I didn't think about him for the rest of the day. Not much, anyway. But the encounter left a residue, a faint, pleasant hum of possibility. It wasn't about him, this stranger named Alex. It was about me. I had talked to a man, a kind, attractive, funny man, and the world hadn't ended. I hadn't frozen. I hadn't been flooded with suspicion or bitterness. I had just talked. And for a few minutes, I hadn't been Evelyn, the divorced medical assistant, or Evelyn, the determined hiker. I'd just been a person in a bookstore, talking about a book with another person. It was a small thing. A tiny, inconsequential chapter. But every story has to start somewhere. For 12 years, my story had been written as a duet. For the last few months, it had been a soliloquy. Today, for the first time, I had the faintest inkling that maybe, someday, it could become something else. A story with a larger cast of characters. I went home, made a cup of tea, and cracked open the new book. The first page was blank, untouched, a clean slate. I took a deep breath and began to read. The following Saturday, the bookstore felt different. The air itself seemed charged with a quiet, humming potential. I told myself I was just there for a new hiking guide, something to plan my next summit. But the hiking section was on the second floor, and my feet, as if with a will of their own, carried me first to the history and classics aisle. And there he was. Alex. He was perched on a small, rolling ladder, reshelving books high up on a shelf. He was focused, his brow furrowed in concentration, his movements economical and sure. I stood for a moment, watching him, my heart doing a nervous, fluttering tap dance against my ribs. This was stupid. This was reckless. What was I doing? I was about to turn and flee to the safety of travel guides when he glanced down. His eyes met mine, and the concentration on his face melted into a warm, genuine smile of recognition. The Steinbeck fan, he said, climbing down. How was the reread? It was exactly what I needed, I said, and it was the truth. The book's themes of choice and overcoming one's own nature had resonated with me on a cellular level. Good, he said, nodding with satisfaction. He wiped his hands on his jeans. On to the next adventure? Something like that. I held up the flimsy excuse of a hiking book. I was just browsing. The best way to be, he said. Then he hesitated, a faint blush creeping up his neck under his beard. You know, I was just about to take my break. There's a decent coffee shop around the corner. If you're not busy. I could tell you about the new Murakami that just came in, Or, not talk about books at all. He looked adorably flustered, a stark contrast to his otherwise solid presence. A date. This was a date. The words screamed in my head, triggering a cascade of panic. My palms grew damp. The old, familiar scripts of distrust started to play. He's just being nice. He's probably like this with everyone. What does he want? But I looked at his face. There was no guile there, no slick, practiced charm, just a hopeful, slightly awkward invitation. It was the awkwardness that undid me. It felt real. I took a breath. I thought of the mountain trails, of the first step that always feels the most impossible. Coffee sounds good, I heard myself say. My voice only wavered a little. The coffee shop was noisy and bright, a stark contrast to the hushed reverence of the bookstore. We found a small table in the corner. The first few minutes were a clumsy dance of stirring sugar, sipping from mugs too hot to drink from, and making pointless observations about the weather. And then he asked the question I'd been dreading. So, what do you do when you're not rereading American classics or fending off booksellers, that is? I wrapped my hands around my mug. I'm a medical assistant, I said, the title feeling like a shield. His face lit up. Really? That's incredible. My sister's a nurse. The patients you all have, I'm in awe. It must be so rewarding. He didn't say, oh, and change the subject. He didn't look bored. He looked genuinely interested. It was disarming. It has its days, I said, a real smile touching my lips for the first time. Mostly it's a lot of soothing fears and taking vitals. But yes, sometimes it's rewarding. He told me about working at the bookstore, about his degree in history that he'd never really known what to do with, about his love for obscure historical maps. He spoke with a passion that was infectious. He wasn't trying to impress me, he was just sharing something he loved. And then the conversation lulled. He looked at me, his head tilted slightly. You have a really thoughtful presence, he said. It feels like you've done a lot of thinking. The observation was so unexpected, so piercingly accurate, that it stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't a line, it was a true seeing. He was seeing the scars without knowing the wound. The words were there, suddenly, pressing against my teeth. I hadn't planned to say them. I'd built a fortress to keep them in. But sitting across from this kind, awkward man in a noisy coffee shop, the fortress gate swung open. I'm recently divorced, I said. The words were like stones dropping into the space between us. Heavy, final, I braced for the reaction, the pity, the awkwardness, the quick exit. He didn't flinch, he didn't look away. He just nodded slowly, his eyes holding mine. Thank you for telling me, he said, his voice low and serious. That must have been a lot. 4 words, that must have been a lot. It wasn't pity, it was empathy. It was an acknowledgement of pain without trying to fix it, without trying to own it, without running from it. Tears, unexpected and hot, pricked at the corners of my eyes. I blinked them away fiercely. It was, I whispered, and that was it. He didn't press for details. He didn't ask what happened. He simply let the truth of it sit there between us, respected it, and then gently steered the conversation back to safer waters. He told me a funny story about a customer who was convinced a first edition Hemingway was haunted. The rest of the hour flew by. We talked about everything and nothing. The rain came back, sheeting down the windows, but inside it felt warm and bright. When we finally stepped outside, the world smelled clean and new. I should get back, he said, nodding toward the bookstore. The 18th century naval section won't reshelf itself. Right, of course. He shifted his weight. I really enjoyed this, Evelyn. Me too, Alex. Maybe we could do it again sometime. There's a new exhibit of Pacific Northwest maps at the museum next week. I was going to go on Thursday, if you're free. It wasn't a line. It was a specific, genuine invitation to share something he cared about. It was the opposite of the vague, perfect stories Daniel used to tell. I'd like that, I said, and realized with a jolt that I meant it. He smiled, a wide, relieved smile that made his eyes crinkle. Great. Okay, great. I'll see you then. He turned and walked back to the bookstore, his shoulders slightly hunched against the rain. I stood there for a long time, watching him go, feeling the cold rain on my face and a completely unfamiliar warmth spreading through my chest. It hadn't been a dramatic confession. It hadn't been a grand romantic gesture. It had been coffee. It had been awkwardness and honesty and a quiet, profound respect for the unspoken parts of my story. I had told him the single biggest, most painful truth of my life, and he hadn't run. He had simply listened. And in doing so, he had handed me back a piece of myself I thought I'd lost forever. The belief that my story was worth hearing, not despite the scars, but because of them. The world felt different walking back to my car. The gray Seattle light seemed softer. The sound of the rain was a rhythm, not a dirge. I had spoken a truth in a language I thought had been forgotten, and someone had understood. They had not just heard the words, they had understood the unwritten language behind them. And for the first time in a very, very long time, the future didn't feel like a blank, terrifying page. It felt like a map, and I was curious to see what it contained. Trust is not a switch you flip. It is a map you redraw, painstakingly, with a trembling hand, after the original has been burned. Every contour is suspect, every landmark potentially a mirage. My heart was a cautious cartographer, and Alex was an uncharted territory. Our Thursday at the museum was followed by a Saturday hike, one I chose, a familiar trail where I felt in control. He showed up with a slightly too large backpack, having clearly overprepared, and he huffed and puffed his way up the incline with a self-deprecating grin that was impossible not to find endearing. He didn't try to show off. He didn't complain, he just kept going. And when we reached the top, his genuine, awestruck gasp at the view was a better reward than the solitude I was used to. We fell into a rhythm, a coffee after his shift, a walk through the sculpture park, a text message in the morning, found a first edition Bradbury you might like, thought of you. It was never overwhelming, it was gentle, consistent. He was building a bridge, plank by steady plank, and my job was to tentatively test each one, waiting for the inevitable crack that would send me plummeting back into suspicion. The crack didn't come. Instead, something else began to happen. I found myself cataloging his small, unremarkable truths. He said he would call at 7, and at 6:59, my phone would light up with his name. He remembered I took my coffee with a splash of oat milk, no sugar. He talked about his ex-wife not with venom, but with a quiet sadness, taking his share of the blame for their drifting apart. There was no villain in his story, just two people who had failed each other. It was a refreshing, terrifying maturity. He was kind to waitstaff. He loved his nerdy maps with a passion that was completely devoid of ego. He listened, not just to my words, but to the spaces between them. He never pushed for details about Daniel, but when I offered a fragment, a passing comment about how I used to love camping but hadn't been in years, he filed it away. Months passed. The emerald green in my house began to feel less like a rebellion and more like a choice. The hikes were still my sanctuary, but now I sometimes had a companion. And Liam was the ultimate litmus test. The first time Alex was coming over for dinner, a casual pizza and movie night, I was a nervous wreck. I cleaned the apartment twice. I changed my outfit 3 times. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about my son. My entire being was primed for Liam's reaction, for any flicker of discomfort or jealousy. The doorbell rang. Liam, in a shocking act of betrayal, ran to answer it before I could. I heard Alex's warm voice. "You must be Liam." "I'm Alex. I brought a documentary about deep-sea creatures. I heard you're an expert." There was a pause, then Liam's voice, skeptical but intrigued. "Some of them have bioluminescence." "They sure do," Alex said, stepping inside. He held up the DVD. "This one has a whole segment on the anglerfish. It's pretty terrifying." Liam's eyes went wide. "Cool." And that was it. Alex didn't try to be a dad. He didn't try to win him over with extravagant gifts or forced fun. He treated Liam like a small, interesting person. He talked to him, not down to him. He listened to Liam's long, complicated explanation of his latest Lego spaceship with the same focus he gave me when I talked about a difficult patient. I watched them from the kitchen doorway, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I saw Liam, so hungry for positive male attention, cautiously warm up. I saw Alex, so naturally gentle and patient, meeting him exactly where he was. After the movie, after Liam was finally in bed, Alex helped me clean up. The domesticity of it should have felt strange, but it didn't. It felt easy. "He's a great kid, Evelyn," he said, wiping down the counter. "Really smart, and he has your eyes." The simple compliment, encompassing both of us, undid me. I leaned against the sink, a dish towel in my hand. I was so nervous, I admitted, the words a quiet confession. About tonight. He stopped wiping and looked at me, his expression soft. I know you were. How? Because you kept rearranging the napkins, he said, a small smile playing on his lips. And you only do that when you're anxious. The observation was so intimate, so perceptive, it stole my breath. He saw me. He truly saw me, my tells, my fears, my carefully constructed calm. And he wasn't daunted by it. He was attentive. It's just, I struggled for the words, the map of my trust still so full of blank spaces and warnings of here be dragons. After everything, it's hard to believe that something good can just be good, that it won't just disappear or turn out to be a lie. He put down the sponge and came to stand in front of me. He didn't touch me. He just stood there, solid and real. I'm not him, Evelyn, he said, his voice low and earnest. I can't erase what he did. I wouldn't even try. All I can do is be who I am, one day at a time, and hope that's enough for you to believe in. It was the perfect thing to say. It didn't make grand promises. It didn't demand my trust. It simply offered a constant, steady presence, a true north on my new map. I looked at him, at his kind eyes, his hands that were so careful with books and so gentle with my son, his unwavering patience. The fortress around my heart didn't come crashing down. It didn't need to. A gate simply swung open, quietly and without fanfare. It is enough, I whispered, and for the first time I truly believed it. I reached out and took his hand. His fingers were warm and strong, and they laced through mine with a certainty that felt like coming home. It wasn't a dramatic, passionate gesture. It was a quiet agreement, a mutual signing of a peace treaty with the past. We stood there for a long moment, in the quiet, clean kitchen holding hands. The fear was still there, a faint echo in a distant room, but it was no longer the loudest thing in the house. The loudest thing was the quiet, steady rhythm of our breathing, in sync. The sound of a new map being drawn together, one truthful, unremarkable detail at a time. Love the second time around is not a wildfire. It is a carefully tended hearth. Its heat is a deep, steady warmth that seeps into your bones, chasing out a chill you had forgotten was there. It does not consume, it sustains. The first year with Alex was a study in this new, gentle physics. Our lives didn't collide, they intertwined. His maps and history books found a home on my shelves next to medical journals and hiking guides. The smell of his coffee, dark roast, no frills, mingled with my herbal tea in the mornings. Liam's laughter became the soundtrack to our weekends, a sound that was now layered with Alex's low, rumbling chuckle. We fell into a comfortable, joyful rhythm. Our weekend road trips with no destination became a cherished ritual. We'd pack a picnic, point the car east toward the Cascades or west toward the Olympic Peninsula, and just drive. There was no pressure, no itinerary. The goal was the journey itself, the silly car games with Liam, the discovery of a hidden waterfall off a dirt road, the shared silence as we watched the sunset paint the sky behind jagged mountain peaks. It was on one of these trips, pulled over at a scenic overlook, that Alex proved his randomly assigned positive trait in the most breathtaking way. We were watching a hawk circle on a thermal, and I was feeling a pang of something, not sadness, but a profound sense of how far I'd come. I'd been quiet for a few minutes. Alex didn't fill the silence. He just waited. Then, he reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small, paper-wrapped parcel. I saw this a few weeks ago and thought of you, he said, his voice casual as if it were no big thing. I unwrapped it. It was a book, but not just any book. It was a vintage, cloth-bound copy of Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. I looked at him, confused but touched. It was a beautiful gift, but I wasn't a huge poetry person. Open it, he said softly. I did. Tucked into the page containing the poem Song of the Open Road was a dried, pressed flower. A Pacific rhododendron, the state flower of Washington. And next to it, Alex had written in his neat, precise script, Evelyn, for all the roads you've walked to get here, and for all the ones we'll walk together. The view is always better with you. A tear sprang to my eyes, not of grief, but of overwhelming, staggering love. He remembered small details. Weeks ago, on one of our first hikes, I'd pointed out the rhododendron and mentioned offhand that it was my favorite, the official flower of the state I was finally learning to call my own. I'd forgotten I'd even said it, but he hadn't. He'd filed it away, a small, precious piece of me, and had returned it to me in this perfect, heartfelt gesture. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't grand. It was thoughtful. It was a testament to his listening, to his seeing. He didn't just love the idea of me. He loved the specific, detailed reality of me. That was the moment I knew, with a certainty that felt as solid as the mountains around us, that I wanted to build a permanent life with this man. The map of my heart, once so torn and unreliable, now had a true north, and its name was Alex. The proposal, when it came months later, was perfectly us. It wasn't in a fancy restaurant or on a grand stage. It was in our modern apartment in the city, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday night. We were building a ridiculously complicated Lego spaceship with Liam, the living room floor a sea of colorful plastic pieces. I was laughing, trying to find a specific tiny brick, and when I looked up, Alex was on one knee amidst the Lego chaos, holding a simple, elegant ring. Liam was beaming, clutching a brick in his hand, clearly in on the secret. "Evelyn," Alex said, his voice thick with emotion but his gaze steady. "You and Liam are the best adventure I've ever had. The only map I ever want to read is the one that leads me home to you. Will you marry me?" The answer was yes. It was a yes that came from my whole being, a yes that felt as natural and right as breathing. We got married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the bookstore where we'd met, surrounded by books and the people we loved most. Liam was the ring bearer, prouder than I'd ever seen him. And now, here we are. The final piece of the new geometry of our lives falls into place not with a dramatic fanfare, but with a soft, contented sigh. I'm standing in the doorway of a sun-drenched room we painted a soft, buttery yellow. One child, a boy, our Liam, now 9 years old, is on his knees, his face a picture of rapt, awestruck wonder. He is gently stroking the cheek of his new baby sister, swaddled in a pink blanket in Alex's arms. "She's so little," Liam whispers, as if speaking too loud might break the spell. "She is," Alex says, his voice a hushed, reverent rumble. He looks up at me, his eyes shining with tears of pure, unadulterated joy. In his arms is our daughter, Sophia. The name means wisdom, and she already has the wise, old-soul gaze of someone who knows she is deeply, profoundly loved. I walk over and sink onto the arm of the chair beside them, my hand finding Alex's shoulder, my other hand resting on Liam's head. I look down at my daughter's perfect face, at the tiny starfish hand she has managed to free from the blanket. This is it. This is the picture I never dared to paint in my mind. This is the family I thought was lost to me forever. It doesn't look like the first one. It's different. It's better. It's stronger because it was built not on naive hope, but on choice, on resilience, on repaired trust, and on a love that was carefully, consciously built day by day. The journey here was brutal. The betrayal was an earthquake that leveled everything. But from the rubble, I didn't just rebuild the same house. I built a cathedral, with stronger foundations, with brighter windows, with room for more love, more joy, more life than I ever thought possible. I am Evelyn. I am a medical assistant. I am a hiker. I am a wife. I am a mother. The scar from the crack remains, a part of my history, but it no longer defines me. It simply reminds me that I am strong enough to break and brave enough to be put back together. And the view from the other side is more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. Time, I have learned, does not heal all wounds. Instead, it weaves them into the tapestry of your life. The dark threads of betrayal and grief are still there, but they are intertwined now with brighter, stronger threads of joy, resilience, and love. They no longer stand out as stark, ugly slashes. They are part of the pattern, giving the whole piece its depth, its contrast, its story. Our life in the modern apartment in the city is a happy, controlled chaos. Sophia's gurgles and coos are the new soundtrack, layered over Liam's video game sound effects and the gentle rustle of pages as Alex reads in his favorite chair. The apartment is a living entity, breathing with our combined lives. A stack of diapers shares counter space with a half-built Lego starship. A historical atlas is open on the coffee table next to a baby teether. I am watching Alex with our daughter now. He is giving her a bottle, his large, careful hands cradling her tiny head as if it were the most precious artifact he's ever held. He is speaking to her in a low, nonsense monologue about the migratory patterns of Arctic terns. She stares up at him with wide, serious eyes, utterly captivated. This is the man who remembers small details. He remembers the song that was playing on the radio during our first road trip, the name of my favorite hiking trail, the way I take my coffee. And now he is imprinting his steady, unwavering love onto our daughter, detail by detail. My love for him in this moment is a physical ache, a sweet, overwhelming pressure behind my breastbone. It is so different from the frantic, passionate love of my youth. That love was a fireworks display, bright, loud, and ultimately ephemeral. This love is the sun, constant, life-giving, and dependable. It is a choice we make every single day in 1,000 small ways. A small sound makes me turn. Liam is standing in the doorway of his room, his brow furrowed. He's holding his tablet. "Mom," he says, his voice quiet. "Can I talk to you?" The tone is serious. The kind of tone that makes a parent's internal alarm give a soft ping. I nod and follow him into his room, which is a testament to his evolving interests. Space posters on the wall, a microscope on the desk, a discarded soccer jersey on the floor. He sits on the edge of his bed, not looking at me. "Dad texted me," he says finally. "He wants to take me to a baseball game this weekend. The Mariners." Ah, Daniel, the dark thread in the tapestry. He is still a part of our lives, a distant satellite orbiting our solar system. He sees Liam on a regular, court-mandated schedule. He is an adequate father. He shows up. He buys the right gifts. But there is a perfunctory quality to it all, a sense of someone going through the motions of a role he never fully understood. "That sounds like it could be fun," I say carefully, sitting next to him. "I guess," Liam shrugs. He's quiet for a long moment, picking at a loose thread on his comforter. He asked if Alex was coming to my school play next week. "And what did you say?" I said yeah. "Of course he is." Liam finally looks up at me, and his eyes are filled with a confusion that is far too old for his face. Why does he ask stuff like that? It's like he's checking. My heart breaks for him. He is navigating a loyalty he never asked for, a divided landscape of his own making. He loves his father, but he loves Alex. The two are different verbs entirely. "I think," I say, choosing my words with the precision of a surgeon, "that your dad is still trying to figure out his place. And sometimes, that makes him ask questions that feel like checking. It probably comes from a place of caring about you, even if it doesn't feel that way." Liam digests this. He is a smart, sensitive kid, the product of a broken home and a rebuilt one. "I love Dad," he says, his voice firm, as if stating a fundamental law of the universe. "But it's different. With Alex, it's easier. He just gets it. He doesn't have to try so hard." The insight is breathtaking. He has articulated the exact core of it. Daniel's love always felt like an effort, a performance. Alex's love is simply a state of being. "I know, Bug," I say, pulling him into a side hug. "And it's okay for it to feel different. It's okay to love them both in different ways. The most important thing is that you have so many people who love you. Your heart is big enough for all of us." He leans his head against my shoulder, and we sit like that for a while, in the quiet of his room. The tapestry of his life is being woven, too, with its own complex patterns. There are threads of absence and threads of presence, threads of confusion and threads of profound clarity. My job is not to shield him from the dark threads, but to help him see how they make the bright ones shine even brighter. Later that night, after the kids are asleep, I tell Alex about the conversation. He listens, his arm around me as we sit on the couch. "I never want to replace his father," Alex says, his voice quiet and sure. "My job is just to be here, to be steady, however he needs me." "I know," I say, leaning into him. "And you are," he kisses my forehead. "We're a good tapestry, Evie," he murmurs, "all of us, even the messy parts." I look around our apartment, at the life we have built. It is not perfect. It is gloriously, beautifully imperfect. It is a blend of past and present, of loss and gain, of chosen family and given family. The threads of my past with Daniel are still there, but they are woven tightly now with the golden threads of my present with Alex, with the vibrant green thread of Liam's spirit and the soft, new pink thread of Sophia. The crack in my soul is still there. I feel it sometimes, a faint echo when a certain song comes on or when I see a couple arguing in a restaurant, but it is no longer a void. It is a seam, a place where I was broken and then mended. And as the Japanese art of kintsugi teaches, a thing that has been repaired is often more beautiful for having been broken. I am whole. Not because the broken pieces were replaced, but because they were carefully, lovingly, put back together with gold. The scar is not something to be hidden. It is part of the design. It is the proof that I survived. And that, on the other side of survival, I found not just a new life, but a better one. Peace is not the absence of noise. It is the ability to find a center of calm within it. I understand that now, standing on my balcony overlooking the city, a cup of tea warming my hands. Below me, Seattle is waking up, a symphony of distant traffic, barking dogs, and the hum of 1,000 lives beginning their day. Inside, my own symphony plays. The soft gurgle of the coffee maker, Alex's low voice reading a bedtime story to Sophia, the faint sounds of Liam's video game from his room. This is my life. Not a perfect, sterile diorama, but a living, breathing, beautifully messy composition. The journey to this balcony, to this moment of quiet contentment, feels like a lifetime ago. It feels like yesterday. I think of the woman I was in that therapist's office, the one whose world shattered with the perfection of a lie about peanut sauce. I feel a distant ache for her, a pang of sympathy for the pain she was about to endure. I wish I could tell her that the cracking sound wasn't the world ending. It was the sound of her shell breaking open. It was the necessary, brutal beginning of her becoming. The path was steep. There were days I didn't think I could take another step. The descent into grief felt bottomless. The expression of that grief, boxing up all his stuff and leaving it in the rain, was a primal scream made manifest. It was the first, raw, unedited truth of my new life. This is over. I am done. Then came the climb. Hiking was my salvation. It taught my body to carry weight again. It forced my mind to focus on the immediate, physical challenge of the next step and not the bottomless emotional chasm. The rhythm of my breath, the burn in my muscles, the quiet solidarity of the trails, they rebuilt me from the outside in. I found a strength I never knew I possessed, a resilience that was entirely my own. And then, the destination I never knew I was seeking, bumping into each other at a bookstore. A chance encounter that felt like fate. Alex, his kindness wasn't a performance. His patience wasn't a strategy. It was simply who he was. He saw the cracks in me and didn't look away. He saw the person still standing within the broken pieces. He proved his love not in grand gestures, but in the small, meticulous details, remembering how I took my coffee, the name of a flower I liked once on a trail. He loved Liam not as an obligation, but as a privilege. He gave me the one thing I thought I'd lost forever, the ability to trust. We built this life together. We embraced the weekend road trips with no destination, finding joy in the journey itself. We made a home in our modern apartment in the city, a space that reflects all of us, his books, my hiking maps, Liam's Legos, Sophia's toys. It is a home built on choice, on deliberate, daily acts of love. The past is not erased. Daniel is still a part of Liam's life, a complicated thread in our tapestry. But the anger is gone. It has been replaced by a distant, almost clinical pity. He is a chapter I have read, learned from, and closed. The scar of his betrayal is still there, but it no longer aches. It is a reminder of where I have been, not a chain that holds me back. I am Evelyn. I am a medical assistant. I am a wife. I am a mother. I am a hiker. I am a survivor. The titles are not conflicting. They are harmonious. They are the different melodies that make up the song of my life. Alex steps out onto the balcony, slipping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. He smells of soap and baby shampoo. "She's finally asleep," he murmurs, nodding toward the city. "Quite a view." "It is," I agree, leaning back into his solid, steady warmth. But I'm not just talking about the skyline. I'm talking about the journey. The view from the summit is always breathtaking, not just for the scenery, but for the profound understanding of the climb it took to get there. The betrayal was the avalanche that buried my old life. The grief was the long, cold winter. But I dug myself out. I planted new seeds in the thawing earth. And now, I am standing in the sun, surrounded by a forest of my own making, more vibrant and alive than anything that was there before. I turn in Alex's arms and kiss him, a slow, deep kiss that holds the memory of every step that brought us here. "Thank you," I whisper against his lips. "For what?" he smiles. "For the map," I say. "And for the journey." The future is not a frightening unknown. It is an open trail, and I cannot wait to see what vistas it holds. I am ready. I am whole, I am home.